Today's daf we're going to be learning is Zevachim daf Ahim Bet, a nice short daf. And we're back to, as I said yesterday, this is a totally different realm. Right? We're kind of leaving, even though we're still in the world of Kodshim, and obviously things here touch on Kodshim, but we're really in sugyot of what we call sfeikot. And what's interesting about it is we're seeing these sfeikot with the lens of Kodshim. So each time we have these mixtures of heter and isser, things are forbidden, mixed up together, intermingled, and what do we do with them? Well, in this case, we have to have an eye toward the kodshim, and that's what we started seeing yesterday. That sometimes you might think, or at least, maybe it is different, right? We talked about here that on the one hand, you want to nullify things, and on the other hand, you don't want to because you have isurim here, and you're going to put them on the altar, maybe. On the other hand, you have this issue that you also don't want to ruin kodshim. There's a whole idea of lo lafsi kodshim. So we have a lot of conflicting things. And each situation we kind of have to measure and weigh and what are the issues here. So I'll also mention, because I forgot to mention it in class, but Alana Sanhen's shiur from last week of Din and Daf is all about Me'ilah, which is very interesting shiur, kind of setting up the two different approaches to how we view Me'ilah in general. So I know we're not on that topic right now, but I think particularly in Zevachim, I think having this extra content that delves into things more and gives you perspective and a more bird's eye view is very helpful. I know a lot of us are struggling to get through Zevachim. It's not the easiest thing. It's a lot of new concepts, and the extra content on the site kind of gives you the sort of the meaning behind it, the ideas behind it, which just kind of helps put the perspective on that sometimes in the nitty-gritty of the daf, it's hard to get there. So I would, number one, just encourage you. It's okay. We're in Zevachim. We're on the final stretch here, really, to get to the Siyum Mashas in less than a year and a half, or maybe in a year and a half. Um, and and it might be a bit challenging, and maybe that's why this is all at the end. But obviously not, right? This wasn't created for a Daf Yomi cycle originally, but you know, we're gonna get there, and we're gonna get through it, and we're gonna try different methods of how to get through it. Okay, so let's start with our daf. I made a study guide today, which I didn't have a chance to make yesterday, but it's actually useful for yesterday and for today. So I'm going to share it right now. Um, do that 1 second. Just have to- Mhm. So I'm going to share, and we're going to do a little bit of a summary of the end of yesterday's stuff. So if you remember in the Mishnah, we started with all these cases of nullification. And we said that we nullify, right? We started with the first case was isurei hana'ah, things that are forbidden to benefit from in general, like a shor haniskal, a shor that's supposed to get killed, or the chata'ot ha'meitot, which just have to be left to die. So the first category was those. Let's start with that. So the first thing we did was we compared our Mishnah to Mishnah and Temurah and said, you know what the Mishnah and Temurah already says. This idea now, the big chiddush of our Mishnah was, in that case, even echad biribo, even 1 in 10,000, you have 10,000, let's say, sacrifices, and into that adds we get one animal that's supposed to die, right? Either because of shor niskal or was a chatat that is no longer useful. They all have to die, okay? Which is a big chidush. But the Mishnah and Temurah already said anything that can't go on the mizbech forbids in any way, like rovea nirba, which actually is a bit of a different category because those things aren't forbidden to benefit from. So then we had to say, well, what's the chiddush of why does our Mishnah need to be said? And then we had to say, why does the Temurah Mishnah need to be said? So we said that our Mishnah needs to be said because you might have thought in those cases of rovea and nirba, maybe we'll say, look, none of those animals can go on the altar, right? The whole thing is a problem. But that's because we have a use for them otherwise, right? They're not, you don't have to leave them to die, like in our case. Those just, okay, you can't use them for the altar. But regular people can benefit from them. There's no problem in animal engaged bestiality. You can get benefit from, you can work in your field, okay? But in our Mishnah, where if you don't allow them on the altar and you basically, right, and you say, well, someone else can use them. Well, no one else can use them either. They're forbidden. Now, if you put the name Isurei Hana'ah, these are all forbidden, like the Shor Niskal. You're basically taking 10,000 animals, or whatever number it is, and forbidding them to ever be used at all, and you're sending them to their death. Yamutu kulan, right? That's what the Mishnah says. Without the Mishnah telling you that, maybe you would have thought that we'd be more lenient here because there's nothing else you could do with them, and we don't want to leave them to die. But then they say, no, that's what our mission needs to tell you. You really have no choice. Now, it would be great if we could come up with a way to say laws of nullification work, but we can't. Okay, so you might have thought from Temurah that maybe in our mission it would be okay, but no, our mission comes to say it's not okay. And in the reverse, in Temurah, it basically, why do you need Temurah then? Because you'd say, well, those are more lenient, right? If our Mishnah says it's not ever batel, nullified at all, well, that's because these are serious. Shoring iskal, this can't be used in any way, shape, or form. So we're going to be more strict with it, right? It's the opposite logic. And in Temurah, you might think would be more lenient. That's why you needed to tell you. Then I'll try to go through this quickly, but I think it's good to have the review. Then we just compared the next line in our Mishnah, which was the exact same category of Temurah. Now, first we compared two different categories, Isurei Hana'ah and non-Isurei Hana'ah, right? Things that are prohibited for benefit outside the world of the temple and things that are only prohibited on the Mizbeach, but outside the world of the temple they would be permitted. But our Mishnah also talks about that case. So then we have two parallel cases completely in our Mishnah and Temurah. So why are those mentioned? Well, if you remember, it's because in Temurah it mentioned the Shiur, but kol shehen, right? Because our Mishnah said 1 in 10,000, but that was for case 1. Case 2, it never said that. So they're giving you the Shiur in Temurah, the amount, the requisite, what's the number? Well, never. Okay. And in our Mishnah, it tells you what the resolution is. Okay. So how do you resolve this problem? Well, actually, you could leave them to graze till they get blemished. You could sell them, redeem them, and then bring them as sacrifices. So our Mishnah has the solution. So theoretically, you could have made one Mishnah with both that and that. That the Gemara doesn't ask. The Gemara is living with the fact that there's this Mishnah and that Mishnah, and why are they both necessary? Each one adds a different detail. Now, that's a different kind of answer than the first comparison. The first comparison was, why couldn't you have learned one from the other, right? And each one you might have thought that this would be nullified, blah, blah, blah. In this case, it's not that, right? They're exactly the same. So you just have to say, well, each one adds some element that wasn't mentioned in the previous. And from the combination of the two Mishnayot, you get the whole picture. Now the Gemara goes back to, and this is why I wanted to start with it, what our answer was in the first section of the first chart in today's daf, which is all these Zevachim, right, in the Mishnah, all these Zevachim, right, they're all going to have to die if they mix with the Shor and Iskal. And we said, why could you not have learned that from Temurah? Because you might have thought that we'd be lenient when it comes to things that are forbidden for anybody, even to hedyot, even to a regular person. So that's what the Gemara is going to question right now. Okay, when we ended the class with this yesterday, end of Ayin Aleph Amud Bet, to hedyot nani tanale. But that law that we don't allow Isurei Hana'ah to be permitted even to regular people, like let's just say, fine, don't bring it on the altar, but let's permit it to regular people. Remember, it's forbidden to regular people, but the idea being, well, if one got mixed up in 100 or 200 or 300, fine, we'll allow regular people to use this. Well, or we'll allow because actually I should say it like this. We said you might have thought that because regular people can't use it ever, right? In other words, it's forbidden for regular people. You might have thought even right now we have this animal that's mixed up with all our sacrificial animals. Maybe we would permit the whole mixture and even for the altar, because maybe you'd say, look, if we don't want to destroy kachim, and also we don't want to, there's nothing to do with this animal. We're going to have to leave an animal to die, because again, in Temurah, we can at least let people use the animal, right? It might maybe can't be brought on the altar, but it can be used by people. In this case, it can't be used by anybody. So let's just now remember, why is this why are we suggesting this could be a good resolution? Because the Torah law says, Acharei Rabim La'ato, we can follow majority. And if one thing gets mixed up in a majority of items, by Torah law, these are canceled. So why don't we say when there's really bad, like crazy circumstances, like the animal's gonna be left to die because there's nothing we could do with it. Maybe we'll say, you know what, this one shor and his calm mixed in with all these animals. Let's allow it. And then once you allow it, it's actually even allowed to go on the altar, theoretically. So now the Gemara has to explain why you wouldn't have learned it from that Mishnah in Avodah Zarah, because in Avodah Zarah, it really says the same thing. In Avodah Zarah, what does it say there? It says in Avodah Zarah, Elu asurin v'osrin b'kol shehem. These items are forbidden and forbidden in any amount. And what's on that list? Nesech, Avodah Zarah. These are all things that are forbidden to benefit from. And Shor HaNiskal is in that list, even though the Gemara didn't quote it for whatever reason. but they kind of think you know the rest of the Mishnah, so they don't quote the whole thing. But the Shor Niskal, which is the same as ours, or even if you didn't have that, I mean, these are all the same category. They're all forbidden to benefit from. And what does it say? Those items in a combination are never nullified. So what do you see here? Well, we could have learned that law, that since these are items that if we don't nullify them, right, we're going to destroy them completely because there's nothing to do with them. So we can learn that from the Mishna of Avodah Zarah. What is our Mishnah telling us that the Mishna of Avodah Zarah didn't already tell us? Okay, now what's the main difference between our Mishnah and the Mishnah of Avodah Zarah? If we allowed nullification in our Mishnah, we could offer them on the altar. Those things in Avodah Zarah, we're not talking about things being offered on the altar. They were just talking about regular people can't benefit from them. You have one barrel of wine mixed up, right? It was Yain Nesach mixed up with all your barrels. Well, you can't benefit from any of them. Okay, but no one was talking about bringing them on the altar. Even the Shor and Iskal, the animal, we weren't really talking about putting it on the altar. Just talking about forbidden to benefit. So that's why the Gemara is going to say, starting now at the top of our daf, Tzricha. You need them all. Why? Why do you need both that Mishnah and this Mishnah? If from there, hava amina lahegyo, aval gavoa ema lo nafsedinu lekulu. Ah, you might have said, there, maybe it's just for a hedyot, but because this is for a sacrifice, as I said, that's the main difference. Why this is a sacrifice? Maybe you'd say lo nafsedinu lekulu. Now I told you there's this concept we don't want to get rid of kachim. We don't want to destroy kachim, things that were designated for sacrifice. We don't want to just let them be destroyed. It's a big issue. So when it's just a regular item, your wine, who cares, right? Or you have a bunch of animals, not who cares, but okay, so you got stuffed. Your stuff got mixed up. There's nothing you could do. But here, there's something else pulling, which is we don't want to be mafsi kachim. We don't want to let all these animals that were designated to be sacrifices to God, now they're going to die. So you might have thought maybe we'd allow nullification again. Let's revert back to Torah law and allow nullification to kick in. The imehacha, now we have to do the reverse. Okay, so if by us it said it, laws of nullification don't kick in, obviously by Avodah Zarah. So why do we need the Mishna of Avodah Zarah? Well, hava mina hanimile kodshim demais. Avachulin de lo mais, ema isran ali batlu beruba, and therefore it's tzricha. Here we do the reverse logic. If you say it's not going to be nullified in a mixture of animals that are supposed to be offered as sacrifices, that's because if we would allow nullification, what would happen? We would end up taking this animal that is a shor and iskal, right? Let's say we have 100 animals. One is a shor and iskal, and the rest are animals that were designated for sacrifices. And we say you can offer them all up because the laws of nullification kick in. Now, this goes back to maybe we should just talk before we get into this about this question. Like when we say tuma hutra b'tzibor, remember, or tuma dechuya b'tzibor, we had this whole debate. When we say we can allow people to sacrifice things when they're tamei, when the majority of the people are tamei, are impure, do we say it's permitted or do we say it's completely rejected, right? Like completely wiped out? Okay. Do we say, well, we'll allow this even though the tumah is still there? Or do we say, no, like it's as if there's no tumah there? Well, it seems here when they talk about laws of nullification, it's still there. There's still a shor and iskal there. We don't view it as if it's eliminated completely, as if we erase it. It's still there. So we might just say, look, laws of Rove tell us that, well, you can treat them all the same as if they're all sacrificial items. But then you're taking one of these animals, this is a shor and iskal, which is forbidden to benefit, and you're bringing it to God. That's a terrible thing. Like, that's disgusting. You can't just offer things to God that are not appropriate to offer to God. And on the one hand, we took these animals and we don't want to say, well, they were designated to God, now we're going to destroy them. On the other hand, you also don't want to offer to God things that are totally inappropriate to be offering to God. So, an ox that killed somebody, right? That you don't want that ox being offered to God. That's a terrible ox. So, in the world of the temple, we can understand that we're not going to allow laws of nullification to kick in because even though it's nullified, it's still there, and it's still, then you're doing something pretty unpleasant. But in Isurei Hana'ai, okay, your wine got mixed up with one, your 100 barrels of wine got mixed up with one barrel of Yain Nesach. Say, okay, so in the end, somebody's drinking Yain Nesach, which is bad, but it's not like you're offering up something to God that's despicable, right? Laws of nullification work to say, look, we don't know which one. So each time you have one, you can imagine that's the one that's not Yain Nesach. And, in some world of halachic reality of, well, it's there, but it's not really there because you don't really know that it's there, and your chances are that it's not it. So we can allow that to kick in. And that's what the Mishna of Avodah Zarah is coming to tell you. No, no, no. Even in that case, we don't allow laws of nullification that normally work in other situations to work. Okay, that ends that section of the sugya. That sugya was basically, in simple terms, comparing our Mishnah to the Mishnah in Temurah, to the Mishnah of Avodah Zarah, and basically saying, right, what's the purpose of all these three Mishnayot? Not exactly in that way, because remember, once we explain the contradiction, the not the contradiction, the need for our Mishnah and the Mishnah in Temurah, we gave an answer that then that answer really you could have found in the Mishnah of Avodah Zarah. That's kind of the way that sugya went. But now the Gemara is going to start off on something else, which is going to take us not a lot of time today. It's pretty short, and it's something we've learned before. Now the Gemara is going to say, and we're only going to start this sugya today because it's going to continue. Nibatlu beruba. Well, let's go back to this beginning here. Why isn't this animal nullified? Okay. Now we mentioned yesterday, I believe I mentioned in class, the idea of bugs and how a bug is a bria, it's a complete creature. And that's why we have this problem of cleaning out bugs from food, because even though usually we say bato b'shishim, you won't taste the bug if it's 1 in 60 there's 60 times, let's say, the soup compared to your bug or whatever, your vegetables. But we forbid it because it's not nullified, because it's a creature in and of itself. Now, you would think that the Gemara would say the same thing about the animal. The animal's a creature, right? If a teeny bug is a creature, the animal's a creature. There's a lot of different reasons given why the Gemara doesn't do this. Okay, they don't view the animal as a creature like the bug. There's some explanations given that the bug is forbidden also before, like it's always forbidden. The animal, whatever. I'm not going to get into the different answers given. It's a good question, really. But putting that question aside, the Gemara is now going to have to find a category of items that are not batel. Now, there's all these rules, and we've learned about this many times before. We've learned about nullification. That there's in fact, we've learned this sugya before, twice. It came up in Beitza, it came up in Yevamot, about certain things that are never nullified. Okay, this comes up in sugya all over Shas. Okay, about this is like a favorite topic of the rabbis, laws of nullification, and then what things are exceptions to the rule. So the Gemara says, really, why is this animal not nullified, right, in the majority? So again, one animal of Shor and Iskal with two animals are supposed to be sacrificed. Already we have a majority of the animals supposed to be sacrificed. Theoretically, that animal should be nullified. Now, maybe you say it's because it's significant. Okay, it has significance. An animal is a significant thing. Okay, what does it mean significant? What makes it significant? You can't just say, okay, I think it's important. It has to fit into the criteria. So what's the criteria? Now they start telling you something as if you know what they're talking about, okay? As if you know the Mishnah in Orla, chapter 3, Mishnah Vav, okay? Mishnah 6, as if you know this, okay? And that there's a machloket about Rabbi Meir's opinion there, about what Rabbi Meir actually said. So they're going to start with assuming you know that. Okay, maybe I'll just tell you what Rabbi Meir says. Okay, well, we'll see it inside exactly what case. But he basically says, anything kol shedarko limanot. Anything that, or et shedarko limanot. That's the difference in the girsa. Is it kol shedarko limanot? Everything that's darko limanot, or et shedarko limanot? The one that's darko limanot. Okay, in a minute we'll talk about the difference. An item, what he's basically talking about is items that are sold by the unit. Okay, if you sell items by the unit, that makes it important. Okay? Like you go to the store, you buy cauliflower, at least where I buy cauliflower, you buy one cauliflower. It doesn't matter how big it is. They don't weigh it. It's got a price for what a cauliflower is. Okay? Or celery. Right? You buy a whole thing of celery, you buy it for what its price is. It doesn't matter by weight. Okay? Or how many. Okay? Like if you buy, sorry, it's going to go by how many you buy and not by weight or by some other way. So they say the following. If you say kol shadar kol limanot, which means like this. Now there's some things that are sold by the unit, but some people might buy them in bulk without counting exactly how many. Okay? Like let's say cauliflower, maybe that's a good idea. You buy cauliflower by the cauliflower. Okay? I buy one, or I buy two, or I buy three, or I buy four. But you know what? A wholesaler might come and just buy a crate of cauliflowers. And he's not going to start counting how many cauliflowers are in there. He's just going to buy a crate full of cauliflowers. So that could be an item that is sometimes by counting, okay? And sometimes not by counting. Now, I'm wondering if my example was a bad example about comparing weight and numbers, because in essence, weight is similar to numbers. What I'm saying is there's sometimes where you could just buy in bulk. Okay, so with an animal, let's see which category an animal fits into. Okay, you want to buy an animal, you usually buy one animal or two or three or four. But you might just buy a flock. It's possible you could buy a flock of sheep from someone. And then you don't count how many are in there. You just buy their whole flock. So an animal is something what we would call kol shedar kol imanot. Kol shedar kol imanot means everything that it's in general, the way it's sold is by unit, even though sometimes people buy it not by unit. And that, if you say that that's what Rabbi Meir said there, and that that's an item that has importance, significance, and isn't nullified, then we have an answer. So that would be an easy answer. What's the problem? The problem is, but the one who reads Rabbi Meir is saying, it's only things that are exclusively sold by counting, by number, by item, by unit, then my ikalamemer. Then we have no way to explain why an animal is not nullified, because an animal doesn't fit that category. Because sometimes you buy a flock of sheep or a whole herd of cows, and you don't count exactly. So they don't fit into that category of something significant that wouldn't be nullified. And then we're left with the question. Now we're going to start open parentheses, close parentheses until the end of this daf, and we're going to explain, we're almost the end of the daf. We're going to explain, okay, let's give the background. What's the Mishnah in Orla? What are the different opinions? What are the different opinions of Rabbi Meir? Who's the one who says et shedarko? Who's the one who says kol shedarko? Then we'll just return to the question according to this person, according to that person, instead of according to the one who says et shedarko and kol shedarko. We're just going to fill in, oh, according to Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, who have the machloket about it. And with that, we'll kind of then just start the next answer. Ditna. Okay, so now we're going to go back and say, okay, what were we talking about? Mishayu chavile tiltan shel kilei hakerem. You had bundles of fenugreek that were kilei hakerem. What's kilei hakerem? Well, you planted your fenugreek in close proximity to your vines, and they grew together. And that is mixed breeds, which are forbidden to benefit from. That's what we're looking for, something that's forbidden to benefit from. Turning now to Amud Bet. Yidaleku, they have to be burned. Okay, so if you have bundles of fenugreek that were planted next to the, right, they're now bundles, but right, they grew from Kilei Kerem, you now have these bundles of fenugreek that have been planted next to, right, the fenugreek itself was planted next to the vine. They grew together, you now have these bundles, you have to destroy them. Okay, because there's nothing you could do with them. Just like we talked about the animals, nothing you could do. They have to be destroyed, right? They have to be left to die. In this case, we burn them because they're food, right? We can burn it. Nit arvu. Now, that's not yet our case. That's just the actual item that's forbidden b'hana'ah. Nit arvu ba'achirim. And some people have the gersa and achirim ba'achirim. It doesn't really matter. In other words, they got mixed up now with other bundles of fenugreek that weren't kilei hakerem. There goes our mixture. And maybe even from there, one batch came from there and got mixed up with others. Okay, that's a debate whether that's here or not in the Mishnah. It's not so important for our purposes. Kulam yidaleku. The entire pile that you have, you could have 100, you could have 200, 300, 400. One thing of kilei hakerem mixed in there, the whole thing has to be destroyed. Divrei Rabbi Meir. The chachamim omrim ya'alu be'echad u'matayim. The rabbis say no. It's 1 to 200. If you have up to 200 of the problematic ones, of the good ones, with one problematic one, you have to destroy them. But if you get to 200 against that one, you have 200 good ones and only one bad one, at 200 to 1, it's nullified. Okay, now the rabbi's opinion doesn't interest us, okay, even though it's actually the way we paskin. But what they're talking about is within Rabbi Meir. Shaya Rabbi Meir Omer. Now here comes the explanation. Here we're going to have the girsa issue. Now, obviously, when they quote Rabbi Meir, they're going to have to quote it with one version because they can't put both words in the version. But they're going to write here kol shedar kol imanot for whatever reason. But I even have a footnote that kind of goes off to the side, which says et shedarko. Okay, so which one appears here, we don't know. But it doesn't really matter because we're going to then say Rabbi Meir Yochanan holds one reading, Rabbi Rish Lakish holds the other. So this is the word that's going to change. Rabbi Meir says, right, the same way you can't say two words at the same time. Shamor v'zachor b'dibur echad. We can't both say them at the same time. You can't both write both words at the same time and show them both. So, maybe you could kol / et, but anyway, they didn't. Kol shedar kol imanot mekadesh. So Rabbi Meir said, again, let's just ignore the word kol. Items that are sold by unit are mikadesh is the word they use in the Torah for kilei hakerem as being ruined. Okay, mikadesh usually means sanctified. Here it means these are problematic and need to be burned. Okay, they're no good. So something that is kilayim, and if it's an item that you sell by item by unit, it's a problem and it will never be nullified. The chachamim disagree and they say, listen, Eino mikadesh ela shisha dvarim bavad. I have 6 items on my list. Those items are super important and items that are very special because they're special and unique, they're never nullified. But everything else, like your chavilei tiltan, nullified. Rabbi Akiva Omer Shiva, he adds one more. Ve'eluhen. Okay, this is not important because we're only interested in Rabbi Meir, but we're going to hear their opinion anyway because we're quoting the Mishnah out here. Egoze perech, special type of walnuts. Rimone badan, special type of pomegranates. Okay, these were from particular perech. There's, I think, a debate about what perech is. Badan is a place. Okay, Rashi says perech and badan are both places. Okay, so the walnuts from this place, right? People talk about, they have the best, right? The olives in Italy, something like that. Okay, so the walnuts in perech, the rimonim in badan, the pomegranates in badan, chaviyot stumot, barrels of wine that are sealed. Okay, those will never be nullified. Chilfei tradin. Okay, these are, maybe someone can help me with the English. They're something with beets. I don't remember what the word chilfei is. They're the stalks of the beans, or beet of the beets. Sorry, I didn't mean beans. I meant beets. So the stalks of the beets, the greens of them. I don't know why these are so significant. Kilchei kruv, okay, the stems of the cabbage, and dlat yavanit, okay, Greek talk about importing things, okay, the Greek gourds. Rabbi Akiva Mosif, af kikarot shabalabayit. Okay, I can agree with this one, right? Homemade bread. Okay, bread made by someone in their own house. Wow, that's not nullified. Haro'oila orla haro'oila kilei hakerem kilei hakerem. Well, now they say, okay, we're in the Mishnah in orla. Now, not all these are connected with orla. What's orla? Orla, okay, or we actually were in the Mishnah in orla, but we're talking about kilei hakerem. So these are two completely different things. Don't confuse them. Orla is things that grow. Now, both of them, just so you know, orla and kilei hakerem, both of them are forbidden to benefit from. So it's going to be the same rule for both. Orla is the tree, the first 3 years of fruit that grows on your tree, first 3 years after planting. And kilei hakerem are these vines that are grains that grow next to vines. So basically, we have a combination in this Mishnah of things that grow on trees. So those are relevant for orla halacha. And the things that grow on the ground, right? And like the bread that comes from wheat that grows from the ground, or all those other items that grow from the ground, those are all we're talking about. The topic is kilei hakerem. So that's just a pointer, just so you know, when we're talking, in case you were confused, when we're talking about kilei hakerem, what does that have to do with fruit on a tree? Or aren't we in Masechet Orla? What does that have to do with things growing in the ground? So some of these relate to Orla, some of these relate to kilei hakerem. Okay, but now let's go back to our main thing. Itmar Alai was said about this machloket, this about Rabbi Meir's opinion. So now we're leaving the rabbis of Rabbi Akiva's side who say only these 6 or 7 items. Okay, those are the only ones that are not nullified, and that has nothing to do with whether you sell them by the unit or not. That's a whole different opinion. But within Rabbi Meir, it was said that Rabbi Yochanan Amal, and now we know this already. Et shedar kol imanot shaninu. Rabbi Yochanan says items that are sold only by the unit, 100% of the cases, that will not be nullified. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, otherwise known as Rish Lakish, Amar, Kol Shedar Kol Imanot Shaninu. Everything that's generally sold by the unit, but sometimes is sold not by the unit. So that's your machloket. Close parentheses. Now we go back and we just repeat the question. But like I said, we're not going to say, according to the one who says this, according to the one who says Kol Shedar Kol, or according to the one who says Et Shedar Kol. We're just going to fill in the name of the person. Hanicha Rish Lakish. Okay, so this works perfectly according to Rish Lakish, who said Kol Shedar Kol Imanot, and then we'll say, oh, that's why the animal's not nullified. Why are we here in the first place? We want to know. Why isn't this animal really nullified berov? Okay, and the answer is because the animal is important and it fits into this category we know from Rabbi Meir that anything that's sold generally by the unit, like animals, which are generally but not always sold by the unit, that's never nullified. But Ela the Rabbi Yochanan, who says, no, 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 that category only includes items that are 100% of the time sold by the unit. Ma'ika l'meimer, how we can explain. So we're left back with our original question because we have an answer according to Rish Lakish, but we don't have an answer according to Rabbi Yochanan. So Amarav Papa, Hi Tana, Tana delitri ktsiotu. Da'amal, kol davar sheyesh bo minyan, afilu b'derabanan lo batil v'kol shkem b'deoraita. Okay, this line we're going to understand much more tomorrow. It's actually mostly in tomorrow's daf anyway. But Rav Papa says there must be a different Tana'itic opinion that he's relying on, and tomorrow we're going to get into that one. We're going to learn another Mishnah about the litra diktsio. It's actually right, it's a Mishnah or a Braita. It's a good question. We'll look at that tomorrow. I think it's a Braita. Well, I see it also comes up in the Mishnah. It says the Tanya. Okay, I'll have to look at that tomorrow. But another, so yeah, there's a Tana there that holds kol davar sheyesh bo minyan, okay, which we're going to talk about exactly what that means. And there, even b'derabanan lo batil, all the more so b'deoraita, from a derabanan issue, which we're going to talk about that tomorrow, what that derabanan issue is. Not that for sure for deoraita, which is what we're talking about. These are deoraita isurim. Right, for sure, we're not going to allow it to be right, and we're going to. This is for korbanot, okay, for disqualified korbanot. Of course, we're not going to allow this kind of thing. So we'll get to that tomorrow. So the basic answer is fine. We'll find some other Tana'itic opinion. Okay, it can't be this Rabbi Meir that our Mishnah is relying on. It must be, or not necessarily. If you take Rish Lakish's approach, it could fit with Rabbi Meir. If not, we have to find some other opinion, and that's what we're going to do. By the way, I just want to point out, if you say it would be batal barov, what they're suggesting, you still wouldn't be able to sacrifice all the animals. What would you do? You would do what the next category in the Mishnah said. You would leave it to graze, right? Leave them to graze till they got a moon, turn them into, right? But sell them, take the money and buy sacrifices. You still wouldn't be able to actually sacrifice that shore and skull. But you could then come up with the solution we come up with for the next category, which is at least don't let them all die, right? Let them get blemished, redeem them and all that. But we don't allow for that. And that's because, again, we have to figure out why. Why is it so significant? So we'll review our daf right now using the study guide. I didn't share my screen the whole time, but the study guide does go till the end of the daf. So let's just look at it, the study guide, and we'll see. So we started with, again, our Mishnah compared to Temurah. We gave an answer why our Mishnah is here and why the Mishnah Temurah is there. Then we had the second case of our Mishnah where we had to say, right, this is all from yesterday. What does each part add? But if you go back to that first one, in the first box there, we had to explain why our Mishnah is here. And it's to say, right, even though these are forbidden also to a head yoke, we're still not going to be more lenient about them because there's nothing to do with them. You might have thought we'd be more lenient, but that could have been learned from Avodah Zarah. And then we had to say, why do we still need our Mishnah, even though we can learn that from Avodah Zarah? And for that, we gave an explanation. And then we had to say, well, if we have our Mishnah, why do we need Avodah Zarah? And for that, we explained. So we gave answers for that. And then came this big question, which we're in the middle of, which is, why isn't this animal batal barof? And then we brought a possible answer, but that only works if you're Rish Lakish, who holds Kol Shadar Kol Limanot. And for that, we had to read the whole Mishnah and see B'chlok of Rabbi Yochanan Rish Lakish on how to understand Rabbi Meir. And from there, we suggested, well, you're right. According to Rabbi Yochanan, we really don't have a good answer. So we'll try a second one, and that's Rav Papa, and we're going to figure out what that second opinion is. That second answer is tomorrow, and we'll continue the sugya. Wishing everyone a good day.